tested it, but. Committee on Science, Space, and Technology will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare recess of the committee at any time. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, the chair announces that recorded votes will be postponed until 9 a.m. tomorrow in this room. But the chair adds one caveat after consultations of the ranking member. Depending on the vote schedule tomorrow, we may find it necessary, if we're not in session, to finish our votes at some point today, but we will provide sufficient notice to both sides as promptly as we can. With that, today we meet to consider H.R. 4755, the Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act, H.R. 4824, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act, H.R. 4877, the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act, H.R. 1069, the Clean Energy Demonstration Transparency Act of 2023, H.R. 3915, the Aviation Weather Improvement Act, H.R. 4866, the Fire Weather Development Act of 2023. I recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. We have 6 bills up for consideration in this last markup before the August recess. We've had a busy and productive start to the year, and I look forward to coming back in September to continuing advancing our full agenda. Today we're considering bills spanning from the research and technology realm to energy and the environmental sector. The first bill under consideration is H.R. 4755, the Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act, sponsored by Ranking Member Stevens and Representative Keene. This legislation supports research, workforce development, and standard-setting activities at NIST and NSF for privacy-enhancing technologies, also known as PETs, and calls for government coordination for the development of PETs to ensure responsible data use. In simple terms, PETs is a broad range of technologies that allows organizations to collect, share, and use data while mitigating the privacy risks that arise from those activities. As we move forward more of our lives online through services like online banking, healthcare, and shopping, it's critical that we have the measures in place to protect individuals' personal and private data. Up next, we'll have 3 energy bills, beginning with H.R. 4824, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act. This bill directs a coordinated research effort across the Department of Energy, the Department of Agriculture, and the Department of Interior to improve our ability to sequester carbon through land use. Sound land use practices can conserve resources and improve our environment, while also helping the development of cleaner energy production methods. This bill will advance the research and development of our federal agencies on large-scale carbon sequestration opportunities and pave the way for additional solutions for a wide range of geographies and economic sectors. Many thanks to Representative Baird and Ranking Member Lofgren for sponsoring this important piece of legislation. Next, H.R. 4877, the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act by Representatives Lee and Bice. There are currently tens of thousands of known abandoned oil and gas wells across the country, including in my district, that leak methane, pose health and safety risks, and can pollute local groundwater. This legislation will help us identify new materials and advanced techniques to find and manage abandoned wells, which will ultimately lower overall cost incurred by state, local, and tribal communities undertaking these plugging efforts. Our third energy-related bill is by Representative Mike Carey's Clean Energy Demonstration Transparency Act of 2023, which I have co-sponsored along with Ranking Member Lofgren and Representative Williams. In the past, we've seen millions of dollars in taxpayer-funded demonstration projects be significantly mismanaged. H.R. 1069 will improve transparency in clean energy demonstration projects at the Department of Energy by expanding congressional reporting requirements for all demonstration projects managed by their new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. This will ensure a level of accountability to prevent any problems that may arise and guarantee funds are used appropriately. Lastly, our 2 final bills are environmental related, focused on improving our weather forecasting capacities. H.R. 3915, the Aviation Weather Improvement Act, enhances the National Weather Service's forecasting of turbulence events and increases the NDWS's procurement of aviation weather data from the commercial sector. It will also greatly advance turbulence forecasting tools and services, as well as identify data gaps that can inform flight planning. I want to thank Representative McCormick for his time and efforts in leading this vital piece of legislation. And our last bill of the day is the Weather Development Act of 2023, sponsored by Representative Garcia and Carvalho. This bill directs the NOAA administrator to establish a program to improve fire weather and fire environment forecasting and modeling. Wildfires are happening year-round across the country, frequently destroying lives and property. To mitigate these devastating consequences, it's critical we have the best forecasting and prediction capacities to stop fires in their tracks. It is only fitting that NOAA, our world-class forecasting entity, lead these efforts to support emergency services and protect everyday citizens. But we cannot forget that the many agencies involved in land management decisions and the actual fighting of active fires, as well as state and local emergency managers who have to coordinate their community's response to these severe weather events. That's why I'm pleased to see an interagency coordinating committee and a national advisory committee established through this bill to ensure that all parties have a seat at the table and federal tools or services have a direct pipeline to those who need them most. With that, I look forward to a productive markup today, and again, thank all our members for their hard work and bipartisanship in bringing these important bills to the table, and I look forward to continuing the good work. I now yield to the gentlewoman from California for opening remarks.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. Today, the Science Committee, as you have mentioned, will consider these 6 bills that demonstrate again how Democrats and Republicans can come together to improve and advance our nation's scientific enterprise. The first item is the Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act. It's wonderful to thank Representative Stevens and Representative Keene for their thoughtful work on this legislation. The bill directs NSF and other relevant agencies to accelerate the development of privacy-enhancing technologies. These technologies have the potential to vastly improve the way people's privacy is protected when information about them is processed. It is a difficult challenge to get privacy correct in a way that allows for the effective use of information, and this bill will help. I'm pleased that we're advancing H.R. 4824, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act, which I'm proud to co-sponsor with Representative Baird. The bill would amend the carbon storage provisions in the Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020 to support R&D on ways to sequester carbon in terrestrial ecosystems, agriculture, and forestry. Recent academic research has found that agriculture approaches that enhance the carbon uptake of soils have the potential for many positive benefits, including increasing productivity and improvements in the stability of yields, something the farmers who live in my district could greatly benefit from. Next bill is the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act, which the chairman has described quite well. Introduced by Ms. Lee and Ms. Bice, it creates a research development and demonstration product at DOE to identify and confront the problem of abandoned oil and gas wells, and we certainly have those in California. As we transition to a clean energy economy, we have to locate all these wells and have the proper technology to mitigate the harmful methane emissions from the potentially hundreds of thousands, potentially even millions of abandoned wells across our country. Of course, the next bill, the Clean Energy Demonstration Transparency Act, which I'm proud to co-sponsor, has received kudos from the environmental community. The Department of Energy has received huge mandates over the past few Congresses, from sweeping landmark climate and energy laws to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that law established a first-of-its-kind Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, which is tasked with centrally coordinating the department's larger-scale clean energy technology development. This bill simply requires reporting on the activities of this office, and it's going to help us manage better our oversight responsibilities. Representative McCormick's Aviation Weather Improvement Act is important. The amendment in the nature of a substitute, this bill is a product of a bipartisan agreement and will complement a bill introduced by Representative Stevens that was included in the recently House-passed FAA reauthorization under the research title, and I look forward to supporting it. Lastly, we will consider the Fire Weather Development Act introduced by Representatives Garcia and Carvalho. It establishes a program in NOAA to improve fire weather forecasting, detection, and warnings. We all know that the issue of wildfires is enormously important, not just for those areas where there are wildfires, but the rest of the country that's exposed to the smoke. So I look forward to eventually taking up a whole of government initiative to reduce loss of life and property through investment in wildland fire R&D and translation of research to operations, such as described in my bill, H.R. 4584, the National Wildland Fire Risk Reduction Program. I'll just close with this. Each one of these bills will play a useful role in making sure that our climate is better managed to avoid climate change. We hear from news reports that this July is the hottest ever recorded and potentially the hottest month in human history. That is happening at the same time that the bipartisan effort that the chairman and I and the rest of the committee has made for fusion energy has not received the attention that it should have by either the Senate or the House Appropriations Committee. And I would ask unanimous consent to put into the record a copy of the disappointing results on both sides of the Capitol on the fusion budget, Mr. Chairman.
Seeing no objection, so ordered.
With that, I yield back.
The gentlelady, I appreciate her always thoughtful remarks. Other members are invited to submit their opening statements into the record. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 4755, the Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4755, to support research on privacy-enhancing technologies and promote responsible data use and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Ms. Stevens to speak on the underlying bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ranking Member Lofgren. I am just so pleased to offer H.R. 4755, the Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act, and I certainly want to thank my colleague, Congressman Tom Keene, for working with me to introduce this legislation. And I would be remiss not to recognize my lead science policy staffer, Julia Poirier, who is joining us for her last markup on the committee, and to say that she has been a true collaborator in passing critical legislation, from the landmark CHIPS and Science legislation that began in the first year of the last Congress, the 117th Congress, to bills shaping the future of the NSF and NIST and artificial intelligence and quantum. It's just truly remarkable. And so as we get ready to head into the August recess, I am so pleased to recognize my lead science policy staffer, Julia Poirier, who does come from Michigan and has been a true partner to me. The Privacy Enhancing Technology Research Act is going to support research, workforce development, standard setting, and government coordination for privacy-enhancing technologies, or PETs. This couldn't come at a more critical time for our country. PETs are a broad range of technologies that allow organizations to collect, share, and use data while mitigating the privacy risks that arise from those activities. Differential privacy, encryption, and secure multi-party computation are just some of the examples of these technologies. And PETs are enabling technologies that allow for the improvement of critical industries of the future, such as artificial intelligence and data science, without the privacy risks. And so these technologies also have the potential to enable broader use of federal data sets, as privacy risks are often the biggest barrier to open government data efforts. H.R. 4755 will support the development, deployment, and adoption of PETs. This directs the National Science Foundation to conduct fundamental privacy research that can help improve these technologies, assess their limitations, and broaden their applicability. This bill also directs NSF to support workforce development activities in order to help address the growing shortage of privacy professionals and researchers across the country. The bill supports activities at the National Institute of Standards Standards and Technology to facilitate the development of standards and guidance for integration of PETs into the public and private sector. So we've got a bill that's touching, yet again, the National Science Foundation and the National Institute of Standards and Technology, truly meeting a charge of our time when the conversations around artificial intelligence and the guardrails that we need to put up, particularly as it pertains to privacy, are very essential. We all know we're not a regulatory committee. We don't have oversight on regulation, but we can utilize federal agencies to make outcomes better and meet the charge of the time where the technology is evolving. So this legislation is also going to direct the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy to coordinate federal activities to accelerate the development, deployment, and adoption of PETs across the government. We're so grateful for the OSTP and the role that they play across our government. And so I'm pleased to say that this legislation did pass out of this committee last year unanimously, and it went on to pass the House of Representatives by a incredible vote of 401 to 19. And this legislation has been endorsed by the Federation of American Scientists, the Future of Privacy Forum, Carnegie Mellon University, and the University of California System. And I have dozens of constituents who reach out to me on a regular basis about it. So Congress has been considering different proposals for privacy legislation for obviously what seems like decades now. And while some of those reforms fall outside the jurisdiction of this committee, legislation like this supports privacy research and standard settings that can help address the unmet needs. Proud to partner in a bipartisan way, eager to see this pass through committee and to the House floor yet again. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I ask for unanimous consent to enter Representative Kane's statement for the record. He's the co-sponsor, and he's ironically on the maybe as many as 4 or 5 markups, offering a bill simultaneously in another committee now. Is there any objection to entering his statement in the record? Seeing none, so ordered. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill?
Mr. Chair, I have an amendment at the desk.
Okay. Seeing no other request for time on the underlying bill, we'll proceed with the amendments in the order listed in the rostrum. And the first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Ohio, Ms. Sykes. The clerk will report the Sykes Amendment number 16.
Amendment to H.R. 4755, offered by Ms. Sykes of Ohio.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Ohio is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I first want to start by recognizing and acknowledging my colleagues, Representatives Haley Stevens of Michigan and Tom Keene of New Jersey, for introducing such a pertinent and timely bill, one that I can offer this very necessary amendment. Globally, this amendment seeks to explore the technologies and techniques that would protect an individual's right to privacy and confidentiality from unauthorized geo-tracking. Mr. Chair, before I became a member of Congress, one of the last bills I introduced as a member of the state legislature came about from a constituent of mine who was highly concerned because her former partner put a geo-tracking device on her car and tracked her whereabouts for several months. As that constituent became more aware of what was actually happening, she drove to the police department. They helped her find the device and essentially told her there was nothing that they could do because there is no and continues to be no violation or penalty for geo-tracking an individual in the state of Ohio. We are working on that, as I understand, in our state, and 2 great senators from Ohio are taking that mantle up. But the bill I introduced before I ended up in Congress really highlighted the need of ensuring that we are clear about these types of geo-tracking devices and how they are impacting the lives of intimate partner victims. Particularly women throughout this country have continued to be victimized by these tracking devices unbeknownst to them, and there are no penalties and there's not a lot of information known about them. We have heard from police departments and prosecutors' offices about the challenges of these cases because there may not be laws on the books and there's just not a lot of understanding. We don't know exactly how many women are and victims are being impacted, but certainly this amendment will allow us to start the process of talking about this a bit more and understanding how people have turned a very useful technology into nefarious use. These geo-tracking devices have typically been used to identify bags or luggage as people travel or make sure they're not losing their goods, but unfortunately people have found something nefarious in a good technology, and I'm so proud today that we are enabling research that would potentially advance ways to protect domestic violence and intimate partner violence survivors from further abuse. It is something that the Bipartisan Women's Caucus has taken up, eliminating domestic violence, and this is just one more way in which we are serving the women and the people of this country. The fact that we are doing our part is important because consent plays a huge role in data protection and privacy, and it is important that we support research that will examine ways to preserve individual privacy to prevent the unfortunate consequences of unwanted tracking. Mr. Speaker, finally, I told my constituents when I was elected that I was going to bring their voices and their concerns with me to Congress. This is one of the many ways in which I am showing and proving to my constituents that I am keeping my promises to Ohio's 13th congressional district, and I do hope that all my colleagues allow me to adequately serve my constituents as well as theirs by adopting this amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The chair recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Just briefly, I want to thank Representative Sykes for this amendment. It, as she noted, this expands the scope of research under this bill to include research on technologies and techniques to mitigate unconsented or unwanted location tracking. This is an item that has been of concern on a bipartisan basis to many members of this body, and I want to thank her for this important amendment, and I hope that we all support it, and I yield back.
Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Any further discussion? Hearing none, the question is agreeing on the Sykes Amendment, number 16. All in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. Are there any other amendments? There were no other amendments pre-filed for this bill. Does any other member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 4824, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4824, to amend the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to require the Secretary of Energy to carry out terrestrial carbon sequestration research
Without
and
objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Dr. Baird to speak on the underlying amendment. Oh,
Thank you, Mr.
yes. Proceed, Dr. Baird.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as always, you did such a good job of describing the bill. I don't know that I can add anything, but I also appreciate the ranking member being on. But this Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act simply authorizes the Department of Energy to carry out terrestrial carbon sequestration research and development, and those activities in collaboration with other federal key agencies like the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Interior. Land is a critical component of our climate system in which plants and ecosystems can absorb carbon and store it in biomass. Together, these terrestrial storage sites represent a large untapped opportunity for additional CO2 reduction. For example, land areas have been a net sink for carbon dioxide since 1990 and absorbed 12% of the United States greenhouse gas emissions in 2021 alone. Despite this potential in the United States leadership in both carbon management and environmental science, DOE's research has focused primarily on large-scale sequestration in geological formations. This focus leaves a significant knowledge gap related to carbon storage in soils, rangelands, mine tailings, and in other methods. Additional research and development is needed to explore the safety and the full range of these practices, measure carbon storage potential, and advance the next generation of agriculture and land-based solutions. In 2020, the Science Committee worked together to pass significant legislation to reauthorize DOE's carbon storage research and development activities. My bill would simply build on these successes and direct DOE to evaluate terrestrial carbon sequestration in addition to carbon sequestration in geological formations. This updated policy would focus on reducing uncertainties associated with the behavior of sequestered carbon, improving carbon sequestration methods, and providing data needed for development and demonstration of new technologies. Importantly, my bill would also strengthen requirements for DOE to collaborate with and leverage existing knowledge from several relevant federal agencies and requires the submission of coordinated research agenda within 2 years of enactment. By linking DOE expertise in basic research and carbon storage, DOI expertise in geological formations and mapping, and USDA expertise in crops and plant dynamics, we can accelerate the research that will be needed to harness these methods. We must take an all-of-the-above approach when developing the next generation of clean energy technologies, one that makes use of our country's many resources and makes the best use of our limited research and development dollars. Land-based carbon sinks can increase soil productivity and water holding capacity and even improve stability of crop yields. By simply expanding DOE's existing policy direction and enhancing its coordinated research and development efforts, we can take full advantage of this significant opportunity across multiple sectors. I would like to thank Ranking Member Lofgren for continuing the bipartisan tradition of the Science Committee and working with me on this important common sense legislation. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized, speak on the underlying bill? I see the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Bonamici. Recognized 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I make my remarks, I want to publicly thank Morgan McHugh for my team, who's been doing my science, climate, and ocean work. This is her last time with me in the Science Committee, and I want to thank her for her public service. So I want to thank Ranking Member Lofgren and Dr. Baird for introducing H.R. 4824, the Carbon Sequestration Collaboration Act. This bill promotes research and development of land-based ecosystems to sequester carbon. Farming and other land use issues have many advantages and can boost carbon absorption and retention in soil. Investing in improved practices in agriculture and forestry are important steps toward decarbonization. For my colleagues who are interested in sequestration, I would ask that you all join Mr. Posey and me in our work to promote healthy blue carbon ecosystems, which offer similar sequestration benefits as land-based efforts, only in the ocean estuaries, lakes, and rivers. Blue carbon ecosystems, for example, mangroves, tidal marshes, seagrasses, kelp forests, can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and store it for centuries to millennia in stems, branches, leaves, roots, and soil. Research increasingly shows that these coastal ecosystems sequester and store carbon at a higher rate per unit than terrestrial forests. It's not a trivial difference. Blue carbon ecosystems can store up to 4 times more carbon than their terrestrial counterparts over the course of a year. Moreover, they continue to store this carbon for millennia, making them some of the most efficient carbon sinks on our planet. The protection and restoration of coastal blue carbon ecosystems could prevent approximately a gigaton of carbon dioxide from entering the atmosphere by 2050. And importantly, these ecosystems also provide habitat for fisheries, protect shorelines from storms and sea level rise, and improve water quality. Rep. Posey and I lead a bipartisan bicameral bill, the Blue Carbon for Our Planet Act, that would strengthen federal research on blue carbon and take steps to protect and restore coastal blue carbon ecosystems. So I support the underlying H.R. 4824, and I invite the chairman, ranking member, and my colleagues to work with Mr. Posey and me so our ocean and coastal ecosystems can also contribute to our sequestration work. Investing in terrestrial carbon sequestration is one piece of the puzzle. Protecting and restoring coastal blue carbon ecosystems to mitigate and adapt to the climate crisis will complement our efforts in H.R. 4824. And Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member, by passing 4824, which addresses sequestration in land, and the bill I'm working on with Mr. Posey, which is sequestration in water, we will bring new meaning to the phrase, one if by land, two if by sea. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. There were no amendments pre-filed for this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I call up H.R. 4877, the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4877, to amend the Energy Policy Act of 2005 to direct the Secretary of Energy to
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Ms. Lee to speak on the underlying bill.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren. I'm proud to introduce the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act with my colleague across the aisle, Representative Bice. While many look at this institution and see partisan division, this legislation is evidence that bipartisan efforts are alive and strong. Some of the worst air quality in the country is found in my district, which inspires the work I do on this committee to affect change in my community and the communities I represent through legislation like this. Climate change is pervasive and it impacts everyone. It does not discriminate between Democrat or Republican, rich or poor. While oil and gas operators are required to seal wells at the end of their productive lives, there are an extensive amount of oil and gas wells that are inactive, unplugged, and have no solvent owner of record. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania has upwards of 200,000 estimated orphan and abandoned wells, many drilled before modern regulations took effect. Unfortunately, only about 25,000 of those wells have been documented. Wells pose significant risks to communities because they can leak benzene and other volatile organic compounds, as well as methane, a potent greenhouse gas. The EPA estimates that methane emissions from inactive, unplugged wells contribute to CO2 equivalent of 7 to 20 million metric tons per year, which is approximately the emissions of 2 to 5 million cars. Rep. Bice and I have been able to work together to introduce the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act, which will further support research and development into the subsurface environment and help reduce methane emissions from abandoned mines across the country. I urge my colleagues to support this legislation, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize Ms. Bice to speak on the underlying bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Oklahoma has been a long leader in the oil and gas industry, and the state is taking vital steps to address the more than 17,000 orphan wells that have been left within its borders. If you drive across the state, you will see nearly 500,000 wells that have been drilled into open fields. While active wells still support American energy independence and help us meet our energy demands, if left unaddressed, they can be problematic for landowners. Such sites can be extremely costly to plug and manage, which is why I am happy to reintroduce the Abandoned Well Remediation Research and Development Act with Representative Lee. Landowners should not have to bear the costs of the estimated 700,000 to 3 million abandoned wells in the United States. Improving the research and technology of the remediation process for abandoned wells could improve efficiency, reduce overall costs, and reduce methane emissions across the nation. I urge my colleagues to support the legislation. I thank Representative Lee for joining me on this, and I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill? If there's no further discussion on the bill, we'll proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Virginia, Ms. McClellan, co-sponsored by Ms. Sykes of Ohio. The clerk will report the McClellan Amendment number 17.
Amendment to H.R. 4877, offered by Ms. McClellan of Virginia.
The amendment, without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Virginia is recognized to explain her amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by thanking Representatives Lee and Bice for introducing this important bill to improve our understanding of the climate and environmental impacts of abandoned wells and to support their remediation. Methane emissions from oil and gas wells, including abandoned wells, are a driver of short-term climate change, as you've just heard. These legacy sites also pose significant problems to landowners and nearby residents, so I am glad to see bipartisan action to address this issue. Currently, the bill directs the Secretary of Energy to ensure coordination of program activities with institutions of higher education, the Department of Energy National Laboratories, and the private sector. My amendment with Representative Sykes would add impacted communities, including state and local governments and landowners, to the list of stakeholders that should be consulted implementing this demonstration. It is imperative that surrounding communities are considered and have the opportunity to make their voices heard throughout this research, development, and remediation process. Far too often, low-income communities, communities of color, tribal and indigenous communities bear the brunt of environmental injustice and are left out of the crucial decision-making process. As a matter of fact, in my time as a state legislator representing the Chickahominy tribe and several communities of color, particularly low-income communities, who have been overburdened by energy projects, I heard time and time again that by the time they heard about a project, it was too far down the path for them to have meaningful input. And these communities have experienced disproportionate health and environmental risks caused by oil and toxic chemicals that leak from wells and into the air and contaminating groundwater. It is only through meaningful consultation with impacted communities that policymakers will be able to develop solutions tailored to the unique challenges faced by each community. I urge my colleagues to support this amendment and ensure that impacted communities have a seat at the table along with other stakeholders. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. I now recognize the gentlewoman from Ohio to speak on the amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Representative, as you can tell, I am stretching my words out a little bit to find my page, McClellan from Virginia, for bringing forth this amendment and allowing me to join you. Also want to recognize Congresswomen Summer Lee and Stephanie Bice for introducing this piece of legislation. The amendment that I am offering with Congresswoman McClellan is to include state and local governments as key entities for the Department of Energy to coordinate with, to carry out programs like this, to identify and properly remediate abandoned wells, otherwise known as orphan wells. Orphan wells are located across Ohio, including in Ohio's 13th Congressional District, and according to a 2021 report from the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, there were a total of 1,030 idle and orphaned wells in the state at the end of the year. In my district specifically, there were 3 wells in Portage County, 6 in Stark County, and 2 in Summit County that were included in this inventory calendar for 2021. And these are only the documented wells, the ones that are identified by the Department of Natural Resources. That's why this bill is so important. It provides the resources necessary to help pinpoint and map the location of these abandoned wells. And to that end, authorizing a program like this is imperative to public health and safety because unfortunately in Northeast Ohio, we are vastly too familiar with dangerous chemicals finding their way into our drinking water. That's why I'm excited to collaborate with my colleague, Jennifer McClellan of Virginia, to ensure that we are coordinating with all stakeholders, those who know the communities well, in order to appropriately address impacted communities. This includes state and local governments who deal with these issues every single day. So to Mr. Chairman and my colleagues, I urge all of us to vote in favor of this amendment and the underlying bill. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Anyone else seek to be recognized? I recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to thank Ms. McClellan and Ms. Sykes for this amendment. They've described it quite well, but obviously all of us want to make sure that all the stakeholders, including state and local governments, the landowners, the community, are involved in this important effort, and their amendment is an important one, and I urge its adoption and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the McClellan Amendment number 17. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it. There were no other amendments pre-filed for this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, I should say, pursuant to Committee Rule 2F, House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill, it will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 1069, the Clean Energy Demonstration Transparency Act of 2023. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 1069, to amend the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to require reporting regarding...
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Mr. Miller to speak on the underlying bill.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. I'm proud to speak on behalf of fellow Ohioan and former Science Committee member, Representative Mike Carey, in support of this bill, H.R. 1069, the Clean Energy Demonstration Transparency Act of 2023. H.R. 1069 amends the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act to expand reporting requirements at the Department of Energy for all demonstration projects managed by DOE's new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations. The IIJA authorized DOE to establish OCED, and together with the Inflation Reduction Act, appropriated more than $27 billion for this office in the coming fiscal years. Energy demonstration projects are a critical bridge between lab discoveries and deployment of new technologies. However, the scale and complexity of these projects can make administering them a challenge. Given past reports of DOE's mismanagement of demonstration projects, the creation and unprecedented expansion of this entirely new office should give us all pause. This legislation takes a simple but important step to improve congressional oversight of OCED and its massive influx of taxpayer dollars. By requiring the department to provide Congress with the semi-annual reports on the status of all of their demonstration activities, this body will have more insight into the progress being made and the benefits that are being returned to the taxpayer. It is imperative that the department is still implementing these projects in an efficient and timely manner that reduces the potential for waste, fraud, and abuse. I'd like to thank Representative Carey for his leadership on this bill. I encourage members to support H.R. 1069, a good government bill which will improve accountability and transparency practices at the Department of Energy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill? If there's no further discussion on the bill, we'll proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania, Ms. Lee. The clerk will report the Lee Amendment number 11.
Amendment to H.R. 1069, offered by Ms. Lee of Pennsylvania.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from Pennsylvania is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I strongly support this legislation that will ensure that this committee demonstrates a commitment to transparency and accountability in government operations. I offer this amendment to ensure that as a representative of the American people, we publicly share information about the critical initiatives the Department of Energy is carrying out to address environmental challenges and promote sustainable practices. My amendment to make contract details available to the public also ensures that taxpayer money is being used responsibly and catalyzes investor confidence in clean energy initiatives. And I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The ranking member seeks recognition.
Mr. Chairman, I want to thank the author of this bill. It's a good bill, and I want to thank Ms. Lee for this important amendment. We all support transparency, and this amendment will ensure it. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I urge adoption and yield back.
Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to the Lee Amendment number 11. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. They do indeed have it. There were no other amendments pre-filed for this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill will be postponed. Pursuant to notice, I now call up 3915, the Aviation Weather Improvement Act. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 3915, to improve the National Weather Service forecasting of turbulence and acquisition of aviation weather data.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Mr. McCormick to speak on the underlying bill.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. As a former helicopter pilot in the Marines, I know firsthand the considerations you must give to the weather before taking to the skies. Fog, high winds, turbulence, thunderstorms, ice, and snow are the all routine weather occurrences that can impact commercial and recreational flights, as well as ground crew operations and maintenance tasks. Additionally, I think every member of Congress here and many of our constituents have experienced some type of flight delay in the last 6 months, as weather volatility is a constant threat to travel plans. That is why I introduced H.R. 3915, the Aviation Weather Improvement Act. This bill will improve all aspects of aviation weather forecasting and prediction by authorizing the National Weather Service to acquire readily available commercial data and partner with the U.S. Weather Enterprise to deploy critical atmospheric sensors. As proven by NOAA's Commercial Weather Data Pilot Program, which Chairman Lucas has been a champion of, the process of procuring weather data from the commercial sector is cheap and viable option to supply federally collected data and has been initially successful in improving NOAA's weather modeling capabilities. My bill will allow the National Weather Service to expand on this topic by increasing observation data within the National Mesonet Program by acquiring multiple types of data from airlines and the private sector, such as Mode S and water vapor data, or aircraft meteorological data relay, and tropospheric airborne meteorological data. Try to say that 3 times fast. At one of our very first committee hearings this Congress, one commercial company stated that the observation data they provide from 260 aircraft to the national mesonet represents less than 1% of the total commercial global aircraft fleet. To accept this low-level activity would simply leave data on the table and hamstring NOAA's weather modeling capabilities for no reason. My bill will give the National Weather Service the needed authority and resources to expand and the deployment of sensors and procure additional commercial data related to aviation weather. In addition to authorizing the public-private partnership on weather data, H.R. 3915 also has explicit focus on improving turbulence forecasting and modeling. In reality, the commercial airlines encounter severe turbulence. In March of last year, 7 people were taken to the hospital after a plane leaving Texas experienced turbulence bad enough to cause the plane to divert to Dulles Airport, and these types of stories are the passengers' greatest fears. While the National Weather Service Aviation Weather Center provides some turbulence tools and services, it is primarily focused on the potential hazardous weather conditions, which can exclude some events. And even then, this information is primarily communicated in the form of AirMet and SIGMETs, which cover huge geographic areas with broad warnings and potential conditions instead of specific locations. The Aviation Weather Improvement Act addresses this by codifying the inclusion of turbulence events and phenomena in the operation forecasting capabilities of the Aviation Weather Center. This will ensure that the recreational and commercial pilots have a definitive and accurate resource for turbulence information that can inform route-specific flight planning. Put simply, my bill will lower over 5,000 flights per year that encounter severe turbulence, as well as make a dent in the 30% of annual delays caused by weather, and I think we can all get on board with that. I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I now recognize Ms. Stevens to speak on the underlying bill.
As a co-sponsor, I am very pleased to support H.R. 3915, the Aviation Weather Improvement Act, a bipartisan bill to improve NOAA's forecasting of turbulence and build up atmospheric data to enhance the safety of our aviation system. As the ranking member on the subcommittee for research and technology, we've been working to advance the research and development of technologies that can help us better predict and mitigate the impacts of climate change on aviation. And according to the FAA, turbulence is the leading cause of injuries to airline passengers and flight attendants in non-fatal accidents. Between 1980 and 2018, there were 298 turbulence-related accidents in the U.S., resulting in fatalities and 374 serious injuries. The cost of turbulence to the U.S. economy is estimated at about $100 million per year due to delays, diversions, fuel consumption, and aircraft damage. This is why I introduced this Severe Turbulence Research and Development Act of 2023, which directs the FAA to conduct research on how to better detect, monitor, and forecast turbulence, especially clear air turbulence. We cannot address this challenge alone, and we need to work with our partners at NOAA, who are responsible for providing weather information and guidance to the FAA and the aviation sector. NOAA has a wealth of expertise and resources that can help us improve our understanding and modeling of turbulence. It's great to work in a cross-functional, interagency way, and this is also why I support H.R. 3915, which requires NOAA to collaborate with the FAA to identify data gaps in turbulence. This is one thing that we have recognized, that there are gaps in the data, to inform route flight planning and support the transition of research to operation programs, including greenhouse gas observing instrumentation. This bill complements and builds on my original bill by ensuring that NOAA has the authority and direction to conduct the necessary research and provide the essential services for aviation weather forecasting. I want to thank Congressman McCormick. I also want to urge my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3915, a common sense bill that will improve our aviation forecasting capabilities and enhance the safety and efficiency of our aviation system. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
Generally yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill? If there's no further discussion on the bill, we'll proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment in the nature of a substitute that was noticed on Tuesday and offered by the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick. The clerk will read the McCormick amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3915, offered by Mr. McCormick of Georgia. Strike all after the enacting
The clerk
clause.
will, without objection, the clerk, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Georgia is recognized to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas. This amendment makes very minor changes based on feedback from my colleagues in the minority, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the FAA. It ensures the intent and execution of this legislation will align with the capabilities of the agencies. I want to thank my colleague across the aisle for working with us to reach a bipartisan agreement on this bill, especially Ms. Stevens for co-sponsoring it, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. I want to thank Congressman McCormick, and I know he worked with Congresswoman Stevens for this bipartisan substitute amendment, which improves the turbulence in aviation weather forecasting. I appreciate Mr. McCormick and Chairman Lucas, as well as their staff, for working with all of us to get a good bipartisan bill. This amendment will ensure the National Weather Service has the best data and technology available to support its turbulence forecasting capabilities with the interest of protecting the public safety during airplane travel. I support the amendment and urge everyone to support it as well. Thank you. I yield back.
Is there further discussion? If there's no further discussion on this amendment, and since it is an amendment in the nature of a substitute, we will move to and consider other amendments. There were no other amendments pre-filed to this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none, there will be a vote on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say nay. The amendment is adopted. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill will be postponed. Who would have ever guessed the final bill? Pursuant to notice, I now call up H.R. 4866, the Fire Weather Development Act of 2023. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 4866, to direct the Administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to establish a program.
Without objection, the bill is considered as read and open for amendment at any point. I now recognize Mr. Garcia to speak on the underlying bill for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas, for bringing up this bipartisan Fire Weather Development Act for consideration within the committee. What we're trying to do is impart a revolution in how we fight fires, a revolution in firefighting affairs, if you will. This bill is desperately needed, and it couldn't be more timely given what is happening in Southern California, not just over the last several decades, but getting worse now even this year. Every day there's a new fire threatening our communities in my district, and just 2 weeks ago when we were in a hearing about this bill in this committee, we discussed a fire raging in my hometown of Santa Clarita, and this week we've got another fire that's already grown to several hundred acres in just less than 48 hours and has put nearly 300 firefighters and our constituents in harm's way. So the bottom line is that fire season now is year-round, and we now in the modern era have, especially in Southern California, the largest interface between human beings and their homes and the wildlands like what we have in Angeles National Forest. So this puts us at probably the highest risk posture in terms of not just the ignition of fires, but the loss of life potentially as a result of these fires. So it's clear that we've got to do a better job and need to do more to predict, prevent, and react to these fires. And that's why I introduced this bill, which is the Fire Weather Development Act, which will improve fire weather forecasting detection. It will improve collaboration between agencies so that they can better support and protect the communities vulnerable to these wildfires. It also directs the administrator of NOAA to establish a modern program that will ensure people across the country have easy, reliable access to fire weather emergency alerts and information. It directs NOAA to develop practices that will quickly disseminate that data to collect, that they collect to disseminate to firefighters to help them put the fires out safer and quicker. So this is a crucial means to leverage the novel tools and technologies already being developed by the private sector and then apply them to a broader wildland fire research, monitoring, and firefighting and mitigation activities. The improved tools specifically include drone technologies that I've talked a lot about in the past, these unmanned aerial systems or UASs that are so prolific in the commercial world but not being fully leveraged by the firefighting agencies and the weather forecasting agencies with them. So this will be a force multiplier for those firefighters. We need to obviously send firefighters into dangerous situations to knock the fires down, but these UASs can be there as top cover to show them where the hot spots are and give them the best routing information through the brush and through the fires themselves is a huge leap forward. And finally, my bill directs NOAA to establish the fire weather test bed to enable engagement across all levels of government, academia, research laboratories, and other entities to evaluate fire weather technologies and services and to accelerate the deployment of those new capabilities and technologies by NOAA. So all in all, this bill will help protect and inform vulnerable Americans, not just the civilians, but also the firefighters from the fires. And as we've talked about before, we've moved away from this sort of traditional fire season in California. What's clearly happening is this is a full year of weather cycle that we need to be cognizant of and predicting and forecasting mindfully of. In the winter and spring, we have the rains that fuel that raise the fuels that grow the sagebrush. In the summertime, we have the heat and the droughts that come that then dry out the fuels in our mountains. And then in the fall, we have the winds and the heat that not only continue to dry out that fuel, but also lead to ignition of the fuel. And so this is a year-long cycle, a multi-year cycle that requires a vision and a paradigm as such and a whole-of-government approach to better forecast, to predict, to see these dynamics happen around the clock, not just in the fall. It's a common-sense bipartisan step toward better protecting American lives and property, and I encourage all of my colleagues on this committee, both sides of the aisle, to vote yes. I yield the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just wanted Dr. Caraveo was very active with the author in making this a bipartisan bill, and I wanted to note her excellent work. Obviously, Mr. Garcia and I are both from California. We're well aware of the threat that wildfires pose in California, but certainly Colorado has also had, extreme fires that have threatened communities and frankly also directed smoke across the rest of the United States. So Dr. Caravello's involvement was very important, not only because of her expertise as a physician, her interest in making sure that the safety and health of her constituents is protected, but also because of the state that she helps represent. So I just wanted to I know today is a very busy day. There are committee meetings overlapping. Everybody is trying to be everywhere at once, but I didn't want it to go unnoticed that Dr. Caravello had played an important role in this bipartisan bill, and I thank her for that. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the underlying bill? If there is no further discussion on the bill, we will proceed with amendments in the order listed on the roster. The first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Babin. The clerk will report the Babin amendment number 37.
Amendment to H.R. 4866, offered by Mr. Babin of Texas.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentleman from Texas is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. I also want to thank Mr. Garcia and Dr. Caravello for leading the introduction of this bill, along with the rest of the co-sponsors on this. As this committee has discussed many times in this Congress, the emerging field of drones and unmanned aircraft systems presents countless opportunities to improve the efficiency and the accuracy of many government operations. Wildfires and fire weather are no exception. During active fires, unmanned aircraft systems can be used to evaluate dangerous areas without putting the lives of firefighters on the line. These systems can also collect atmospheric and weather data before and after events to improve our forecasts and models of fire events. My amendment ensures that NOAA utilizes these capabilities while coordinating with NASA, who is leading the development of new technologies and systems through their Advanced Capabilities for Emergency Response Operations project. And this is exactly how federally funded research should work. NASA researches and develops the technology. NOAA takes it from the lab into the field, and state and local communities receive the benefits in the form of data, tools, and services related to the wildfires endangering their lives and properties. Additionally, because multiple parties and agencies are involved in the response to wildfires, new operation systems must be developed so that all tools and technologies are deployed in a coordinated manner. Therefore, my amendment allows NOAA to use any airspace operation system developed and determined ready by NASA. This ensures continuity across the government and prevents NOAA from creating a different system from NASA or the Department of Interior, which would lead to communication nightmares during high-stakes scenarios. This is a common-sense amendment that builds on existing activities and improves coordination in a critical technology area. So I want to thank all my colleagues across the aisle for working with us to reach a bipartisan agreement, and I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? The ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just want to thank the gentleman from Texas for this amendment. NOAA is one of the many potential end users who could leverage NASA's current research, development, and demonstration activities in uncrewed air systems. This includes an innovative new airspace management capability to enable the sharing of information between crewed aircraft, drone operators, and ground crews during wildfire responses. I've mentioned before the absolutely fabulous meeting I attended at NASA Ames Research Center located just outside my district, where people representing local, state, federal, and private sector went together to see how we can work and discuss NASA and its partners' efforts to improve wildfire resiliency. This amendment helps NOAA to use NASA's Airspace Operations System once it is demonstrated and deemed ready by NASA for fire weather and fire environment observation. So I look forward to NASA's continued development and demonstrations in this critical area. I'm glad to support efforts to ensure operational agencies like NOAA can eventually leverage such capabilities. I support the amendment and celebrate it as advancing our efforts to collaborate and make full use of the information we already have. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The ranking member yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, hearing none, I should say, the question is on agreeing to the Babin Amendment number 37. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it. The amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is offered by the gentlewoman from North Carolina, Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross. The clerk shall report Ross Amendment number 52.
Amendment to Fire Weather Development Act of 2023, offered by Ms. Ross of North Carolina.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the gentlewoman from North Carolina is recognized to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Chairman Lucas and Ranking Member Lofgren, and thank you for holding this markup on all of these critically important bills. The National Weather Service's Incident Meteorologists, or IMETs, work on the front lines to support emergency personnel in preventing and fighting wildfires, as well as help keep fire crews safe by providing critical weather information. IMETs are the key members of incident command teams and provide non-stop meteorological support through the duration of active wildfires. Currently, the federal overtime pay cap hinders the National Weather Service's ability to dispatch IMETs, especially during active, severe weather seasons. It's necessary that we support IMETs and provide them with true overtime pay for wildland fire suppression activities as they take on hazardous duties that are not typical for a National Weather Service forecasting job. My amendment would do just that. I encourage my colleagues to support this amendment and the underlying bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment?
Mr.
The
Chairman?
ranking member is recognized for 5 minutes.
I just want to thank Congresswoman Ross for this very important amendment. Incident meteorologists are critical, although not always well-known, part of our wildfire response team, and this amendment will help ensure that the National Weather Service is able to continue to fill these critical jobs and adequately support those committed individuals who help us fight wildland fires to save lives and save property, and her amendment is a thoughtful one. I appreciate her efforts and yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the question is on agreeing to Ross Amendment number 52. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. The next amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by me. The clerk will report the fire weather amendment number 1.
Amendment to H.R. 4866, offered by Mr. Lucas of Oklahoma.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and I recognize myself to explain the amendment. And prior to doing that, I would note that by unanimous consent, I asked to add a statement from Representative Kim for the record. Seeing no objection, so ordered. I offer this amendment on behalf of Mrs. Kim, who is a co-sponsor of the underlying bill and a co-sponsor of the Nest Wildland Fire Communications and Information Dissemination Act. This amendment is simply the text of that act inserted into Mr. Garcia's bill. Both that act and the bill we are considering today touch on the important subject of wildland fire communication. I won't waste available time explaining the intricate details of the amendment because the committee's already agreed to the text by unanimous 30-0 vote during a markup last month in H.R. 369. Therefore, I give this bipartisan language the best chance, to become law, I submit this common sense, previously agreed to text to the underlying bill, and I urge my colleagues to support it, and I yield back my time on the matter. Does any other Does any other member wish to be recognized? The ranking member is recognized for 5
Just
minutes.
very quickly, Mr. Chairman, as you pointed out, the committee has already unanimously supported this, but I want to thank you for your good strategy in moving this forward by making this part of this bill. Obviously, I support the amendment. We all did before, but I wanted to thank you for your important strategic efforts in this way, and with that, I would yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and I would simply note we live in challenging legislative times, and we have to be crafty, effective, thoughtful, and play by the rules. Does any other member wish to be recognized to speak on the amendment? Is there further discussion on the amendment? Hearing none, the amendment is to agreeing on fire weather amendment number 1. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say no. The ayes appear to have it, the ayes appear to have it, the ayes do indeed have it, and the amendment is agreed to. There were no other amendments pre-filed for this bill. Does any member wish to offer an amendment at this time? Hearing none. Pursuant to Committee Rule 2F and House Rule 11, further proceedings on this bill is postponed. As I mentioned earlier, because of possible scheduling changes, we are no longer, well, I've served notice that we will roll votes until 9 p.m. tomorrow, but I would suggest that we will, AM, you're right, thank you. Instead, because of the nature of the schedule, I'd suggest that we, as the schedule becomes clear, roll votes to this afternoon, immediately following the first vote series on the floor today, which is currently, I understand, to be slated between 1:20 and 1:55. If we're all here on time, we will move in the most expedited fashion you can possibly imagine and smoothly take care of this, and all of us can then get back to our schedules. With that, if there's no further discussion, we will reconvene after the first series of votes, subject to the call of the chair. The committee now stands in recess.